The desert heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez checked his equipment one final time. The Afghan sun was merciless, even at dawn, and sweat already beaded on his forehead beneath his tactical helmet. His SEAL team had been inserted into the remote valley 3 hours before sunrise, tasked with what command called a routine reconnaissance mission. But Marcus had been in the Navy for 12 years, and he knew there was nothing routine about operating in Taliban territory. "Echo team, sound off," Marcus whispered into his radio, his voice barely audible even to himself. The responses came back crisp and professional. Danny Ghost Williams, their sniper, reported clear sight lines from his elevated position. Tommy Tank Johnson confirmed the explosive charges were ready if they needed to create a distraction. Jake Phoenix Martinez, their medic, checked in with a quiet, ready-to-save-lives sergeant. And finally, Alex Cypher Chun, their communication specialist, confirmed all channels were open and monitored. The team had been together for 3 years through 2 deployments and countless missions. They moved like a single organism, each man anticipating the other's actions before they happened. Marcus trusted these men with his life, and they trusted him to bring them home. That trust had been earned through blood, sweat, and shared terror in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Their objective seemed straightforward enough. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was using a compound about 2 miles northeast of their current position. The man they were hunting went by the name The Architect, and he was responsible for designing the improvised explosive devices that had killed dozens of American soldiers over the past 6 months. Command wanted eyes on the compound, confirmation of his presence, and, if possible, his capture or elimination. Marcus studied the terrain through his binoculars. The compound sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by rocky hills that provided excellent cover for defenders, but made approach difficult for attackers. There were 3 buildings inside a high wall, with what appeared to be guards posted at regular intervals. Smoke rose from a cooking fire, suggesting people were awake and active despite the early hour. "This doesn't feel right," Danny's voice crackled through the radio. From his position on the ridge, he had the best view of the entire area. "Too many people moving around for a hideout. Looks more like they're expecting company." Marcus felt the same unease. His instincts, honed by years of combat, were screaming warnings. But orders were orders, and intelligence insisted this was their best chance to get the Architect. The man had evaded capture for months, always seeming to know when coalition forces were coming. This time, they had used electronic surveillance and human intelligence assets to confirm his location independently. It should have been foolproof. "Copy that, Ghost," Marcus replied. "Stay alert. We proceed as planned, but everyone keeps their eyes open for anything unusual." The team began their approach, using the early morning shadows and rocky terrain for concealment. They moved in a practice formation, with Marcus taking point, Tank and Phoenix flanking left and right, Cypher monitoring communications, and Ghost providing overwatch from his elevated position. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. They had done this hundreds of times before, but each mission carried the possibility of being their last. As they got closer to the compound, Marcus noticed more details that increased his concern. The guards were too alert, too professional. These weren't the usual mix of farmers and fighters that often made up Taliban units. These men moved with military precision, carried modern weapons, and communicated with hand signals that suggested advanced training. His unease grew with each passing minute. "Sergeant, I'm picking up unusual radio chatter," Cypher reported quietly. "Multiple frequencies, encrypted communications. This is way more sophisticated than what we usually see from local Taliban cells." Marcus paused the team behind a large boulder formation about 300 meters from the compound wall. Something was definitely wrong, but they were too committed to abort now. Command was expecting a report within the hour, and turning back without actionable intelligence would raise uncomfortable questions about their capabilities. Possible hostile activity to the northeast Ghost reported, his sniper training making him the team's early warning system. Looks like armed men moving through the hills about a kilometer out. Could be coming this way. The pieces of a trap began falling into place in Marcus's mind. Too many guards, too much sophistication, and now additional forces in the area. But the architect was supposedly inside that compound, and they had a job to do. Marcus made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "We continue the mission," he ordered. "Get closer, confirm the target, and extract. Fast and clean." The next 20 minutes were a textbook approach. The team moved like shadows, using every piece of cover the rocky terrain provided. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of fear and excitement that came with high-stakes operations. This was what they had trained for, what they lived for. Despite his concerns, he couldn't deny the adrenaline rush of executing a perfect infiltration. They reached the compound wall without detection. The structure was higher than it had appeared from a distance, built of mud brick and topped with broken glass. Tank quickly set charges that would create a breach if they needed a fast exit. Phoenix identified 2 possible casualty collection points where they could treat wounded team members if necessary. Cypher established communication protocols for immediate extraction if things went wrong. Marcus and Tank move along the wall toward what appeared to be the main building. Intelligence suggested the architect would be in the largest structure, probably on the 2nd floor, where he could maintain security while conducting his deadly work. They needed visual confirmation before calling in additional assets. As they prepared to scale the wall, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement that made his blood run cold. In the early morning light, he saw the distinctive outline of a rocket-propelled grenade launcher being positioned on a roof across the compound. Then another on a different building, and then a third. "This is a trap," he whispered into his radio. But even as he spoke, the quiet morning erupted into chaos. The first explosion came from Ghost's position on the ridge. The sniper's location, which should have been invisible from the compound, was hit by precision mortar fire. Marcus watched in horror as rocks and debris flew from the hillside where his friend had been providing overwatch. "Ghost is down! Ghost is down!" Phoenix screamed into the radio, but his words were drowned out by the sound of automatic weapons fire erupting from multiple positions around the compound. Marcus realized they had walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush. The intelligence about the architect had been leaked or fabricated, designed to draw them into this killing zone. Whoever was behind this knew their tactics, their equipment, and their procedures. They had been studied, analyzed, and trapped with surgical precision. "Tank, get us that breach now." Marcus shouted as bullets began impacting the wall around them. The explosive charges detonated with a satisfying crash, creating a hole large enough for the team to escape through. But as they prepared to withdraw, Marcus saw Phoenix running across open ground toward Ghost's last known position. "Phoenix, negative. Do not pursue," Marcus ordered, but the medic was already committed to his rescue attempt. It was exactly what the enemy had planned for. As Phoenix reached the base of the ridge, multiple machine gun positions opened fire, cutting him down in a withering crossfire. Marcus watched his medic fall and felt something break inside his chest. These were his men, his responsibility, and he was watching them die because he had missed the signs of an ambush. The guilt was overwhelming, but he couldn't afford to process it now. Tank and Cypher were depending on him to get them out alive. "We move now," he shouted, pulling Tank toward the breach in the wall. But as they emerged on the other side, they found themselves facing another line of enemy fighters who had positioned themselves exactly where any escaping Americans would emerge. The trap was complete and perfectly executed. The firefight that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in 12 years of military service. The enemy knew exactly where they would take cover, exactly how they would try to escape, and exactly how to counter every tactical move they made. It was as if someone had studied their training manuals and designed the perfect counter-ambush. Tank went down first, taking multiple rounds to the chest as he tried to provide covering fire for the team's withdrawal. Marcus dragged him behind a rock formation, but he could see from the man's injuries that he wouldn't survive without immediate medical attention. Phoenix, their medic, was already down and possibly dead on the hillside. Cypher, call for immediate extraction, Marcus ordered as he applied pressure to Tank's wounds. But when he looked around, he realized Cypher was nowhere to be seen. The communications specialist had either been hit during the initial ambush or had become separated in the chaos of the firefight. For the first time in his military career, Marcus felt truly alone. His team was scattered or dead. He was pinned down by superior forces, and he had no way to call for help. The radio crackled with static, either jammed by the enemy or damaged in the fighting. Tank was losing blood fast, and Marcus could hear the sound of vehicles approaching from multiple directions. The sun was fully up now, eliminating the cover of darkness that might have helped them escape. The enemy had positioned themselves with patience and skill, turning the rocky terrain that should have provided concealment into a killing field with no escape routes. As Marcus checked his ammunition and tried to think of a way out of the impossible situation, he heard something that made his heart sink even further. The sound of helicopters in the distance, but not the familiar whop-whop-whop of American aircraft. These had the higher-pitched whine of Russian-made machines, probably carrying reinforcements for the enemy forces that had already trapped them. Tank's breathing was becoming labored, and Marcus knew his friend was dying. The big man who had saved his life more times than he could count was slipping away, and there was nothing Marcus could do to stop it. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did in that moment, surrounded by enemies and watching his men die because of his decisions. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered to Tank, though he wasn't sure if his friend could still hear him. "I'm so damn sorry." The radio, which had been silent except for static, suddenly crackled to life with a voice Marcus didn't recognize. It was calm, professional, and spoke with an accent he couldn't quite place. The words that came through would change everything that followed. "Night Viper, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on your position and am moving to assist. Maintain your cover and wait for my signal." Marcus stared at the radio, unsure whether to hope or despair. He had never heard the call sign Night Viper before, and he had no idea who Overwatch might be. But in that desperate moment, with his team dead or dying around him, any help seemed better than facing the end alone. The voice came again, still calm despite the chaos of the firefight raging around the compound. "Night Viper, in 30 seconds you're going to see smoke to your northeast. When you do, move Tank to the rally point I'm marking with IR strobe. You'll know it when you see it." Marcus wanted to ask who was talking, how they knew his situation, and what kind of help they could possibly provide against the overwhelming enemy force. But Tank needed medical attention, and staying where they were meant certain death for both of them. Sometimes in war, you had to trust in miracles, even when you didn't understand where they came from. The smoke appeared exactly when mysterious voice had promised, billowing up from behind a rocky outcropping about 50 meters to the northeast. Marcus didn't hesitate. He hoisted Tank onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry and ran toward the smoke, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of bullets that would end both their lives. Instead, something extraordinary happened. As Marcus moved toward the smoke, the enemy fire that had been so precisely coordinated suddenly became chaotic and misdirected. Explosions erupted throughout the compound, not the random detonations of incoming artillery, but precise strikes that seemed to target exactly the positions that had been threatening them. Machine gun nests that had pinned them down moments before went silent in rapid succession. "Good movement, Night Viper," the calm voice said through the radio. "Set Tank down behind the large boulder with the white marking. Medical supplies have been pre-positioned there." Marcus found the boulder easily. Someone had indeed marked it with what appeared to be white chalk, and behind it was a small cache of advanced medical supplies that definitely weren't standard military issue. The equipment was more sophisticated than anything he'd seen outside of a major trauma center, including electronic diagnostic tools and medications he didn't recognize. As Marcus worked to stabilize Tank's wounds using the mysterious supplies, he could hear the systematic destruction of the ambush force continuing around them. Whoever Overwatch was, they had turned the tables completely. The hunters had become the hunted, and the trap had been reversed with devastating efficiency. "Who are you?" Marcus finally asked into the radio as he applied an advanced trauma bandage that seemed to seal Tank's wounds almost immediately. "Someone who's been watching this operation since you inserted," came the reply. "The intelligence about the architect was compromised from the beginning. This was designed to eliminate your team specifically." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone had wanted them dead, had used their mission as bait to draw them into a kill zone. But how had this stranger known about the trap when Command hadn't? "Your friend Ghost is alive but wounded on the ridge," the voice continued. "Phoenix took round to the shoulder and leg but will survive. They're both at a safe location. Cypher was captured but is unharmed. We're gonna get all of you out, but you need to trust me completely." Marcus felt a surge of hope that he hadn't dared allow himself since the ambush began. His men were alive. Wounded, scattered, but alive. The guilt that had been crushing him began to lift slightly, replaced by a desperate need to understand who was helping them and why. Tank's eyes fluttered open as the advanced medical supplies worked their apparent magic. The big man looked confused but alert, a vast improvement from the dying soldier he'd been minutes before. "Sarge, what happened? Who's shooting at the bad guys now?" "I wish I knew," Marcus replied honestly, still monitoring the radio for more information from their mysterious savior. The voice came back with what sounded like mild amusement. "Night Viper, you're probably wondering about the technology you're using. Let's just say some people have access to medical advances that aren't widely distributed yet. Your friend is going to be fine, but he needs to avoid strenuous activity for the next few hours." Marcus looked at the medical equipment again. The trauma bandages had not only stopped Tank's bleeding, but seemed to be actively promoting healing. The diagnostic scanner had provided a complete assessment of his injuries in seconds, displaying information on a screen that looked more like science fiction than military hardware. "Are you military?" Marcus asked, trying to understand who had this kind of capability. "I was once," came the reply. "Now I work independently, keeping an eye on operations like yours. When I saw the intelligence reports about this mission, I knew it was a setup. Unfortunately, I couldn't intervene through official channels without compromising other assets." The firefight around the compound was winding down. Marcus could see smoke rising from multiple buildings inside the walls, and the sound of enemy vehicles retreating in the distance. Whoever Overwatch was, they had single-handedly dismantled a carefully planned ambush with what appeared to be minimal resources. "How did you know this was a trap?" Marcus asked as he helped Tank sit up against the boulder. "The architect died 3 weeks ago in a drone strike near the Pakistan border," the voice explained. "The intelligence suggesting he was in this compound was fabricated and fed through channels known to be monitored by hostile forces. Someone wanted your team eliminated, and they used fake intelligence to make it happen." Marcus felt his anger building as the implications sank in. Someone within the coalition command structure had set them up for assassination. The mission hadn't just gone wrong. It had been sabotaged from the beginning. His men had been shot and nearly killed because someone wanted them dead. "Who?" Marcus demanded. "Who would do this to us?" "That's complicated," the voice replied. "Your team has been very effective at disrupting certain profitable operations in this region. Operations that benefit people who are supposed to be on our side. You've made enemies among people who prefer the war to continue as long as they can profit from it." The radio went silent for a moment, filled only with the distant sounds of the ambush site burning. When the voice returned, it carried a weight that suggested difficult decisions ahead. "Night Viper, I need you to listen carefully. In about 10 minutes, a coalition helicopter is going to arrive for your extraction. The crew believes they're conducting a routine rescue operation, and that's exactly what you're going to tell them happened. You encountered unexpected resistance, your team was scattered, and you held out until help arrived." Marcus started to protest. His men deserved to know the truth about what had happened to them. Command needed to know that their intelligence had been compromised. But the voice continued before he could speak. "If you report what really happened here, you'll be dead within a week," the voice said bluntly. "All of you will. The people who set this up have resources and reach throughout the military hierarchy. They'll eliminate any evidence that could expose them, including witnesses." Tank was listening to the conversation now, his expression growing dark as he understood the situation. Someone in our own command wanted us dead? Someone with access to classified intelligence and mission planning, the voice confirmed. Someone who knew your tactics well enough to design a perfect counter-ambush. This wasn't random Taliban fighters. This was a professional military operation using enemy assets. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. The idea that fellow Americans, people sworn to protect their country, would sacrifice soldiers for profit was almost too horrible to accept. But the evidence was overwhelming. The sophistication of the trap, the precision of the intelligence leak, the knowledge of their procedures, it all pointed to betrayal at a high level. "What do you want from us?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "Your silence, for now," the voice replied. "Go back to base. Accept whatever commendations they give you for surviving an unexpectedly fierce enemy resistance. And wait. I'll contact you again when it's safe to act on what you've learned here today." The sound of approaching helicopters began to grow louder. American engines this time. Marcus could see Ghost being helped down from the ridge by Phoenix, both men wounded, but mobile. Cypher appeared from behind another rock formation, looking shaken but unharmed. Against all odds, the entire team had survived what should have been a fatal ambush. "How do I contact you?" Marcus asked urgently as the helicopter sounds grew closer. "You don't," the voice replied. "I'll contact you. Remember, Night Viper, you survived a fierce firefight through superior tactics and a little luck. Nothing more. Your lives and the lives of anyone you care about depend on maintaining that story." The radio went silent, leaving Marcus and Tank alone behind the boulder with medical equipment that had seemingly appeared from nowhere. In the distance, Marcus could see the extraction helicopter approaching, accompanied by 2 Apache gunships providing cover. Everything looked exactly like a routine combat rescue operation. Marcus quickly gathered up the advanced medical supplies and buried them under loose rocks where they wouldn't be found. Tank's wounds had healed enough that he could walk with assistance, though they would need to make it look like he was more severely injured than he actually was. "Sarge," Tank said as they prepared to rejoin their team. "What do we do about this?" Marcus looked at his friend, a man who had trusted him enough to follow him into combat dozens of times. Tank deserved the truth, but the truth might get them all killed. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did in that moment. "We survive," Marcus replied. "We keep our mouths shut, we take care of each other, and we wait for our chance to get the bastards who did this to us." As the helicopter touched down and medical personnel rushed toward them, Marcus put on the performance of his life. He played the role of a sergeant who had barely survived an unexpected enemy ambush through skill and determination. He praised his men's courage, expressed gratitude for the rescue, and gave a detailed account of the firefight that contained not a single word about their mysterious savior. The flight back to base was filled with the usual post-mission adrenaline and relief. His team was alive, they had survived against overwhelming odds, and they would all go home to fight another day. But Marcus knew that their real fight was just beginning. As the helicopter flew over the smoking remains of the compound where they had nearly died, Marcus caught a glimpse of a lone figure standing on a distant ridge. The person was too far away to make out any details, but Marcus had the distinct impression they were watching the extraction helicopter depart. Then, the figure melted back into the rocks and disappeared, leaving no trace of having been there at all. "Overwatch," Marcus whispered to himself, wondering who had saved their lives and what price they would eventually be asked to pay for that salvation. In his 12 years of military service, he had learned that nothing came free, especially not miracles. But he was alive, his men were alive, and that gave them the chance to eventually find justice for what had been done to them. The helicopter banked toward base, carrying 5 men who now shared a secret that could get them killed. They had survived their first betrayal, but Marcus knew it wouldn't be their last. Someone had tried to murder them for profit, and that someone was still out there, still in a position of power, still dangerous. But they had an ally now, someone with capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. Someone who called himself Overwatch, and who apparently made it his business to protect soldiers from the corruption in their own ranks. Marcus didn't know who he was, what he wanted, or when he would contact him again. All Marcus knew was that when that contact came, he and his team would be ready to settle accounts with the people who had tried to kill them. The war had just become personal in a way that went far beyond anything they had experienced fighting Taliban forces. This was about survival, justice, and protecting each other from enemies who wore the same uniform they did. 3 months passed without any contact from Overwatch. Marcus had begun to wonder if the mysterious voice had been a hallucination brought on by combat stress, except that his entire team remembered the same impossible rescue. They had all heard the calm instructions, all benefited from the advanced medical equipment, all witnessed the systematic destruction of their attackers by an unknown force. Life at Camp Leatherneck had returned to a routine that felt hollow and fake. Marcus went through the motions of briefings, training exercises, and equipment maintenance, but his mind was constantly analyzing every order they received, every mission they were assigned. He found himself studying the faces of officers and intelligence personnel, wondering which one had tried to have them killed. The official report of their mission had been classified at a level that prevented even Marcus from reading it. Command had debriefed them extensively, praised their heroism in surviving against overwhelming odds, and recommended the entire team for commendations. On the surface, everything appeared normal. But Marcus could feel the undercurrents of suspicion and careful observation that suggested someone was watching them very closely. Tank had recovered completely from his wounds, though he complained that the scars healed too cleanly to provide good conversation pieces. Phoenix walked with a slight limp that only became noticeable when he was tired, and Ghost had returned to his sniper duties with his usual quiet efficiency. Cypher had been the most affected by their capture during the ambush, becoming more withdrawn and suspicious of everyone around them. I keep thinking about what he said Ghost mentioned during one of their private conversations about profitable operations. What kind of operations would our own people want to protect by killing us? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. Their team had been involved in dozens of missions over the past year, targeting Taliban commanders, disrupting supply lines, and gathering intelligence on enemy movements. But which of those operations had threatened the wrong people? Remember the convoy interdiction last month? Phoenix suggested during another quiet discussion in Marcus's quarters. We intercepted those trucks carrying what was supposed to be medical supplies, but turned out to be opium? Or the raid on that compound where we found all the American equipment being sold to insurgents, Tank added. Never did find out how they got their hands on our gear. Marcus had noticed the same pattern. Many of their most successful missions had uncovered evidence of corruption, black market dealing, or weapons trafficking that seemed to involve coalition personnel. But every time they reported these findings, the evidence would disappear into the bureaucracy and nothing would come of their reports. Someone's been protecting those operations, Cypher said quietly. Making sure investigations never go anywhere. Making sure the right people never face consequences. The team had become paranoid about their communications, their mission briefings, and even their recreational activities. They developed a system of subtle signals and coded conversations that allowed them to discuss their situation without alerting anyone who might be monitoring them. Trust, which had always been absolute among the 5 men, now extended to no one else. Marcus began keeping a private journal documenting every suspicious incident they encountered, every mission that seemed designed to fail, every piece of evidence that suggested ongoing corruption. He hid the journal in a place where it would be found if something happened to him, insurance against the possibility that their mysterious benefactor was actually leading them into another trap. The waiting was the hardest part. Every morning Marcus woke up expecting to hear the calm voice of Overwatch providing new instructions or information. Every mission briefing made him wonder if this would be the one designed to eliminate them permanently. The stress was affecting all of them, creating a constant state of heightened alertness that was exhausting to maintain. Maybe he's not coming back, Phoenix suggested during one particularly difficult week. Maybe whoever Overwatch was, he moved on to other problems. But Marcus's instincts told him otherwise. The voice had been too professional, too knowledgeable, too invested in their survival to simply disappear. Someone with those kinds of resources and capabilities didn't intervene in a single operation and then walk away. Overwatch was still out there, still watching, still planning something bigger than a simple rescue operation. The answer came on a Tuesday morning during what was supposed to be a routine equipment inspection. Marcus was examining their communication gear when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Hidden inside the radio battery compartment was a small device he didn't recognize, something that definitely wasn't part of the original equipment. "Cypher," Marcus called quietly, "take a look at this." The communications specialist examined the device with growing alarm. "This is a tracking and monitoring unit," he whispered. "Military grade, but not standard issue. Someone's been listening to every conversation we've had and tracking our exact location for months." The discovery of the surveillance device changed everything. Someone had been monitoring their team since before the ambush, probably gathering intelligence about their tactics and procedures in preparation for the trap. But the device was also proof that they were still being watched, still considered a threat worth monitoring. That night, Marcus made a decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. He removed the surveillance device and planted it in the quarters of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the intelligence officer who had briefed them for the mission where they were ambushed. If Harrison was innocent, the device would be discovered and investigated. If he was involved in the conspiracy, he would know his cover was blown. The reaction came within 24 hours. Marcus was summoned to a private meeting with Harrison, ostensibly to discuss the team's readiness for future operations. But when Marcus arrived at the specified location, he found himself facing 3 men in civilian clothes who definitely weren't military personnel. "Sergeant Rodriguez," one of them said in a voice that carried undertones of menace, "we understand you've been asking questions about your recent mission." Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with imminent danger. These men had the look of professionals, the kind of contractors who handle problems that required permanent solutions. The fact that they were meeting him unofficially, away from base security, suggested they intended to eliminate the problem he represented. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus replied, trying to buy time while he assessed his options for escape. "We know about the device," the second man said. "We know you've been discussing classified operations with your team. We know you've been keeping records of things that don't concern you." The third man, who hadn't spoken yet, stepped forward with a photograph that made Marcus's stomach drop. It was a picture of his sister Maria, taken recently outside her apartment in San Diego. She was a civilian, a teacher who had nothing to do with military operations. The threat was clear and immediate. "Your team is going to stop asking questions," the first man continued. "You're going to destroy any records you've been keeping. And you're going to accept that some things are bigger than individual soldiers." Marcus understood that he was trapped. These people had resources that extended far beyond the military base, reaching into his personal life and threatening the people he cared about most. But before he could respond, something extraordinary happened. "I wouldn't threaten his family if I were you," said a familiar calm voice from behind the 3 contractors. Marcus spun around to see a man emerging from the shadows near the building where they were meeting. He was medium height, unremarkable in appearance, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely comfortable with violence. This had to be Overwatch, though he looked nothing like the mysterious figure Marcus had imagined. "Who the hell are you?" the first contractor demanded, reaching inside his jacket for what was probably a weapon. "Someone who's been documenting your activities for a very long time," the man replied conversationally. Did you really think you could operate a weapons trafficking and drug smuggling network out of a coalition military base without someone noticing? The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The three contractors, who had seemed so confident and dangerous moments before, suddenly found themselves completely outmatched by a single man who appeared to anticipate their every move. Within seconds, all three were unconscious on the ground, subdued with an efficiency that suggested extensive training and experience. "Hello, Night Viper," the man said to Marcus with a slight smile. "I told you I'd be in touch when it was safe to act. I think that time has arrived." Marcus stared at his savior, trying to reconcile the ordinary-looking man with the capabilities he demonstrated both now and during their rescue 3 months ago. "Who are you?" "My name is David Kane," the man replied. "Former Special Forces, current freelance problem solver. I specialize in situations where good soldiers are betrayed by the people who are supposed to protect them." Kane quickly secured the unconscious contractors with zip ties and confiscated their weapons and identification. "These men work for a private military contractor called Apex Solutions," he explained. "They provide security and cleanup services for people who profit from prolonged conflicts in places like Afghanistan. The people who try to have us killed," Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Exactly," Kane confirmed. "Your team's effectiveness was cutting into their profits. Every successful mission you completed disrupted operations that were making certain people very wealthy. They needed you eliminated, but it had to look like enemy action to avoid investigation." Marcus felt his anger building as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. "How many other teams have they targeted?" "Yours was the 7th attempt in the past 2 years," Kane replied grimly. "The first 6 were successful. Entire special operations teams eliminated in what appeared to be enemy ambushes, but were actually carefully orchestrated assassinations. The weight of that information was staggering. Dozens of American soldiers had been murdered by their own people for the sake of profit margins." Marcus thought about all the memorial services he'd attended, all the funerals for men who had supposedly died fighting the enemy, when they had actually been killed by corruption within their own command structure. "What do we do about it?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Kane smiled grimly. "We're going to destroy their entire operation," he said. "But we're going to need your team's help to do it properly. Are you willing to risk everything to get justice for the men who died?" Marcus looked at the 3 unconscious contractors, thought about his sister's photograph, and considered the impossible choice he was being asked to make. He could walk away, keep his mouth shut, and probably live to see retirement. Or he could help a mysterious stranger wage war against corruption within his own military, risking court-martial, prison, or death. But when he thought about the faces of the soldiers who had died in fake ambushes, when he remembered the feeling of watching his own team nearly die because of betrayal, the choice became clear. "Tell me what you need," Marcus said. Kane's smile became genuine for the first time. "I need you and your team to volunteer for one more mission. A mission that's going to be very dangerous, probably illegal, and definitely not officially sanctioned by anyone in your chain of command." "What kind of mission?" "The kind that ends this," Kane replied. "Permanently." The mission Kane proposed was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. He had spent 2 years gathering evidence of the corruption network that stretched from private contractors through Coalition Command to Defense Department officials in Washington. But evidence wasn't enough. The people involved had too much power, too many connections, and too many resources to be brought down through conventional legal channels. "They've been operating with complete impunity," Kane explained as he laid out detailed files in a secure location off base. "Every investigation gets buried. Every whistleblower gets discredited or eliminated. Every piece of evidence disappears in a classified filing systems where it can never be used in court." Marcus studied the photographs and documents that revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was just one small piece of a vast network that included generals, defense contractors, CIA personnel, and politicians. The profits from weapons trafficking, drug smuggling, and protection rackets in Afghanistan were flowing to bank accounts around the world. "So what's your plan?" Tank asked. The entire team was present for the briefing, having agreed to hear Kane out before making their final decision about whether to participate in what amounted to a private war against their own government. "We're going to hit their main coordination facility," Kane replied. "It's disguised as a forward operating base about 40 miles north of here, but it's actually the nerve center for their entire Afghanistan operation. We take that down, we capture the key personnel, and we broadcast the evidence to every news organization in the world simultaneously." Ghost frowned at the tactical map Kane had provided. "That's a heavily fortified position with at least 200 personnel," he observed. "How do you expect 5 men to assault a facility that size?" Kane smiled. "We're not going to assault it," he said. "We're going to infiltrate it during a carefully orchestrated distraction, gather the evidence we need, and extract the key personnel for interrogation. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be long gone with everything we need to expose the entire network." The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. Kane had allies within various intelligence agencies who would provide support, but the core mission would depend entirely on the skills and teamwork that had made Marcus's SEAL team so effective. "What about afterward?" Phoenix asked. "Even if we succeed, we'll be fugitives. Our own government will hunt us down for attacking coalition forces." "That's where the evidence comes in," Kane explained. "Once the truth is public, once the media has documented proof of American soldiers being murdered for profit, the political pressure will force a full investigation. The people responsible will have to be prosecuted to avoid a complete scandal. Marcus considered the risks and the potential rewards. They will be sacrificing their military careers, their futures, possibly their lives. But they would also be avenging the deaths of dozens of soldiers who had been betrayed by the people sworn to protect them. And they would be stopping a network that was continuing to kill American servicemen for profit." "I need to know something," Marcus said finally. "Why are you doing this? What's your stake in bringing down these people?" Kane's expression became distant, as if he were remembering something painful. "I was part of a Delta Force team that was sent on a mission very similar to yours 18 months ago," he said quietly. "We were told we were going after a high-value target, but it was actually an ambush designed to eliminate witnesses to a weapons trafficking operation my team had stumbled across." He paused, clearly struggling with difficult memories. "I was the only survivor. 11 good men died because someone decided their profits were more important than American lives. I've been hunting the people responsible ever since." The room fell silent as the team absorbed this information. Kane wasn't just a mysterious operative with unclear motives. He was a soldier seeking justice for his fallen teammates, exactly like they were. The parallel between their situations was obvious and compelling. "Count us in," Marcus said, speaking for the entire team. The nods of agreement from his men confirmed that they had reached the same conclusion. Some things were more important than following orders or protecting careers. Justice for their fallen brothers was one of those things. The next 2 weeks were spent in intensive preparation. Kane provided them with equipment and intelligence that far exceeded anything available through normal military channels. Advanced communication gear, specialized weapons, surveillance technology, and tactical support that suggested he had connections throughout the intelligence community. They studied the target facility until they could navigate it blindfolded. They memorized guard rotations, security procedures, and the daily routines of the key personnel they needed to capture. They rehearsed the mission until every movement became automatic, every contingency was planned for, and every team member could perform any role if necessary. The night of the operation, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of fear and anticipation that came before high-stakes missions. But this time, the stakes were personal in a way that made the danger seem secondary to the importance of success. They weren't just completing a mission. They were settling accounts with the people who had tried to murder them. The infiltration went exactly as planned. Kane's distraction, a sophisticated cyber attack that disabled the facility's security systems while appearing to be the work of enemy hackers, created the perfect window for their insertion. They entered through a service tunnel that Kane had identified through months of surveillance, moving through the underground levels to avoid the main security checkpoints. The evidence they found exceeded even Kane's expectations. The facility contained detailed records of every corrupt transaction, every murdered soldier, every official who had been bribed or coerced into cooperation. Computer servers held financial records, communication logs, and operational plans that documented crimes stretching back 5 years. But the most shocking discovery came when they reached the command center. Among the personnel they captured was General William Morrison, a decorated war hero who had been coordinating the entire corruption network from his position in the Pentagon. His presence at the facility was proof of how high the conspiracy reached within the military hierarchy. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Morrison snarled as Cypher secured him with zip ties. "This operation is sanctioned at the highest levels of government. You're committing treason." "We're preventing treason," Marcus replied. "American soldiers aren't supposed to be murdered for profit margins." The extraction proved more challenging than the infiltration. Despite Kane's cyber distraction, the facility's security teams had detected their presence and were mounting an organized response. The team had to fight their way out through corridors filled with contractors and corrupt military personnel who were trying to prevent the evidence from leaving the facility. The firefight was intense, but brief. Kane's allies provided air support that allowed them to extract with their prisoners and the digital evidence that would expose the entire network. As their helicopter lifted off from the facility, Marcus could see smoke rising from the command center they had just destroyed. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Kane had predicted. The evidence was simultaneously released to news organizations around the world, creating a media firestorm that no amount of government spin could contain. The documented proof of American soldiers being murdered for profit, combined with the financial records showing where the money had gone, sparked congressional investigations and criminal prosecutions. Marcus and his team were initially detained as the government tried to determine how to handle their unauthorized operation. But the political pressure created by the media coverage forced officials to treat them as whistleblowers rather than criminals. They were quietly discharged from the military with full honors, their service records sealed to protect them from retaliation. Kane disappeared shortly after the operation, as Marcus had expected he would, but not before leaving each team member with a secure communication method and an open invitation to contact him if they ever needed assistance. He had found his justice for the Delta Force team that had been betrayed, but Marcus suspected he would continue his private war against corruption wherever he found it. The corruption network was systematically dismantled over the following months. General Morrison and dozens of other officials were convicted of treason and conspiracy. The private military contractors involved were prosecuted under federal racketeering laws. Most importantly, the families of soldiers who had died in fake ambushes finally learned the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Marcus returned to civilian life with a sense of completion he hadn't expected. The guilt he'd carried since the ambush had been replaced by pride in what his team had accomplished. They had survived betrayal, found allies, and ultimately delivered justice for the men who hadn't been as fortunate. 2 years later, Marcus received a message through the secure communication channel Kane had provided. It was brief and to the point. "New situation developing. Team needed. Are you interested?" Marcus looked at the message for a long time, thinking about the comfortable civilian job he'd found, the quiet life he'd built, the safety of staying uninvolved in the dangerous world he'd left behind. Then he thought about other soldiers who might be facing the same betrayal his team had experienced, and the decision became easy. He reached for his secure phone to call Tank, knowing that Ghost, Phoenix, and Cypher would also be ready when Kane needed them. Some fights were too important to walk away from, and some teams were too valuable to break up. They had learned that the real enemy wasn't always wearing a different uniform, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought against corruption within their own ranks. The voice that had saved them in the desert would call again, and when it did, they would be ready to answer. Because that's what soldiers did for each other, especially when the system designed to protect them had failed. They protected each other, they fought for justice, and they made sure that no betrayal went unpunished. The war was over for them officially, but their real mission had just begun. Somewhere out there, other soldiers were facing the same threats, the same betrayals, the same impossible choices. And when they needed help, when that calm voice cut through the chaos to offer salvation, Marcus and his team would be ready to provide it. Night Viper was standing by, waiting for the next call that would change everything.